And that we say that the Nefesh Bahamis also has an innate bittul, just like an animal has a bittul. So the same thing, Nefesh Bahamis has an innate bittul to the Nefesh Elokis, and therefore they're able to work together. This is all, after explaining all of that, the Rebbe is going to say this is not the ultimate level. All of this, all of these unions, and because of that, because of this yichud of Urs and Kalim, and the yichud of Avayin Elokim, and the yichud of Tzimtzum and Kaf, which results in the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamis working together, even though the Nefesh Elokis' natural state is to go upwards, and the Nefesh Bahamis' natural state to go downward. So even that joining of Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamis is not the ultimate state. There is something higher in that experience. So that's what he's going to talk about on page Yud, bottom of the page, is Daled, line 20. Hine, Inyan Niskar La'el, what was mentioned previously. The godly soul transforms the animal soul to holiness. That's identical to the idea that we spoke about, that the odors, the lights are enclosed in the vessels. I knew this means that the 10 soul powers of the godly soul fill up, and they're enclosed in the soul powers of the animal soul. They become filled with the powers of the godly soul. It's not something that remains separate, or the Nefesh Elokis is just exerting an influence over it. Just it's completely joined together in such a type of way. So he's saying, despite that idea that it's filled with it, that the Nefesh Bahamis is filled with the feelings and the approaches of the powers of the godly soul, but it's known, top of the next page. The ultimate purpose is love to come to a level of a pure, unadulterated will, a simple will, a non-complex will that's beyond reason and knowledge and understanding. It's beyond rational devotion to Hashem. Higher than the clothing of the lights in the vessels. We don't want just an ordinary clothing of the lights in the vessels, but something higher than that. Then the Rebbe right away says in the brackets, it's not that it will not deal with the vessel. That's not what we're talking about. Rather, that something that's higher than it that manifests in it. He says in the brackets, line 3, the intention over here is not that the pure, unadulterated will not come down into the vessels. Ella, rather, that this pure, unadulterated will that's beyond vessels should come down in vessels. Oiris bekalim should be the light should come down into the vessels. So then, what are we talking about? Ella, oiris bekalim yifaluk v'shetzarech liism tzadaros na pashu shalom mailim etam. That the way how the lights in the vessels will do what they're doing, it will be from the perspective of that pure will that's beyond reason and knowledge, and higher than being enclosed, lights in vessels. So in other words, what we're having over here is the best of both worlds. We're having a level of a very high level of Hashem's will, the will that's beyond the level of reason, beyond limitation. And that level that's beyond limitation comes down into the limited world, into the tailored world, into all the details of the world of Oris and Caleb. The Rebbe told Shlomo Kunin when he was doing things in an explosive manner. So the Rebbe used to tell them, Oris to Tayu, lights of Tayu, which are infinite lights, but they have to come down in Caleb the Tikkun. They have to come down in settled vessels and vessels that are, down to earth and practical and so on. So the Rebbe goes on line 9 and says, revelation of this level is something that comes from above. This is not something that the person by his own power and capability on his own is able to draw down this will that's beyond reason. The level of Oiris Bekalim, the level of the will that's based on intellect and understanding that a person can draw down by his own power. But when dealing a will that's totally beyond his being, beyond his understanding, which taps into a level that's beyond Seder Ishtalshus, this is not something that the person cannot accomplish on his own. Rather, it's something that's given to him from above. Behind what this means, after the person does his service to transform his animal soul to holiness that we were talking about up till now, up to Pedic Dalit. That the powers of the animal soul should be filled with the powers of the godly soul. This is an avoida that every person can reach there on his own. That you do not need a revelation from above to be able to have, that my animal soul's powers should be transformed and filled with my godly soul's powers. So he says, then comes down from above this pure, unadulterated will that was mentioned beforehand. And this will that is beyond the ken of a person, beyond the person's own avodah, beyond his intellect, etc. It's concerning this. It says, avoidas matana etenis kunas. I will give your koyanim. The koyan is the level of isha chesed. It has to do with avodah of ava. But I will give you an avodah of a gift. What's it mean? Al pichsidus an avodah of a gift. There's a type of avodas Hashem that is something that we cannot attain on our own. It is something that can only be received as a gift from above. And that is something that is after we have done what we have done, as he will explain later on in the next oyes, that once we have done whatever we're capable of doing, so after that, Hashem gives us that which is beyond our capability of doing. Any questions before we go on? Okay, bottom of page Yud Aleph, Ois Hey, line 19. Be it in the explanation of this matter, that there is the avodah that's higher than our doing, and that comes to us in the way of a gift once he has done whatever he is capable of doing on his own. Chazal said, the nature of a human being is that a full vessel cannot contain. The measure of Hashem is that a full vessel contains, an empty vessel doesn't contain. In the simple sense, what we're talking about over here is the physical world versus spirituality. In the physical world, for a person to be able to put something in a bowl, in a cup, in a dish, whatever, the dish has to be empty. If the dish, the bowl, the cup is full, you can't put anything in it. That's what it means in the simple sense. In the spiritual world, in the godly worlds, the more godliness I have within me, so then the more godliness I can receive. But if I'm empty of godliness, if I'm devoid of spirituality, so then I'm not able to receive more spirituality from Hashem. That is the very simple meaning of this Maimer Chazal. Comes Chassidus and is going to take this actually on a much deeper level. So he says on line 22, it's explained in many places, both of these approaches. Beforehand, we were talking about physical versus spiritual. Here we're talking about, and by the way, the physical also denotes a person that is spiritually deficient. That kli moli maxik, that if he's full of himself, midas basar adam, if he's doing by a measure of a human being, and he's full of himself, so then he cannot contain anything else. But if he is empty of himself, he doesn't have ego, he doesn't have a whole, then he could receive more. The Rebbe is going to bring down a tight, both of these things, both the midas basar adam, that clay reikon maxik, that only an empty vessel holds, and the midah of Hashem that only a full vessel holds. The Rebbe is going to say these are two modes and two middos and two types of service of the Eibush. Elam, midas basar v'dam. What is the midah of it? Flesh and blood. Yeah, avodah shefshar lagia lev b'koach atzmo. That's a type of avodah that a person can attain by himself on his own power. And what talks about the midah of Hashem, it's talking about the type of avodah that comes down from above. Concerning this, they said, midas basar v'dam, the measure of a human being, Papa Pejud Bays, clay lekon machzi, clay mole eine machzi, that an empty vessel can contain. When we're talking about the person's own avodah, an empty vessel can contain. It's a full vessel he cannot contain. So now he's going to explain what that is in avodah, in the type of avodah that a person can attain on his own, in the avodah of basar v'dam. The inay nefesh habahamis agdeme tanis. The nefesh habahamis placed its arguments before the judge, in other words, before the yid, prior to the other person in the court case appearing, but prior to nefesh halakis. Meaning, hainum nichnas ba'adam kaidem v'nishrish bay. It enters the person prior to the nefesh halakis and it becomes rooted in it, because nefesh habahamis is there right away at the beginning of the person's birth, and the nefesh halakis, though it begins to come in at the bris and so on, but doesn't fully enter the person until bar mitzvah. So he has a 13-year head start. The nefesh habahamis has a 13-year head start on the nefesh halakis. Magam, and even more so. It's not just that he entered and he's just there. He has squatter's rights, that he's just there, but more so. In his chazik, yoser, behemshach, hazman, shishtamik, harbi, ba'achilu, b'shti, v'shayin, el hazim. The nefesh habahamis being in the body for all this time before the nefesh halakis comes in becomes actually strengthened because of all the physicality that's engaged with by eating and drinking and all the other worldly matters that's involved. Mishumza, because of that, Hariya Adam Kli Molit, the person is considered a full vessel. Why is he a full vessel? He's filled with different types of wills. He complains and he says, I want this. Then even more so, he says, I need this. And then even stronger, he says, I just can't live without this. This is all the ritzonos that are filling him up, that are making him a clay mole, because the nefesh habahamis had this head start. Concerning this, we say, kli mole ain't a max, a full vessel cannot contain, cannot hold. Hainu kasher kli mole, when a person is a full vessel, not only from prohibited things that disturb and disrupt the person, but also he's filled with permitted things. So seemingly, what is it? It's permitted, it's kosher, it's okay. They are permitted matters, but he is not doing those permitted matters for the sake of heaven. Since he's a full vessel, he's full of all of these things. He cannot contain anything from above, anything spiritual, etc. Therefore, instead of all these wills and all these things that he's filled with, he has to be an empty vessel. This means he should empty himself from his physical matter. And should not even desire permitted matters. Not and even things that are necessities. The Rebbe says in the brackets, parentheses, it doesn't mean that he just imagines them to be necessities, but real necessities. Not just things that he imagines that they're necessities. Like I said before, I just can't live without this. Rather, that there are things that are true necessities. But the way he is involved in those true necessities, al pi Torah, according to Torah, considers it's something that's a necessity. He should only desire the spirituality of it, like we've had a few times in the Mamorim that says that what does it mean that I place for you life and death, that the gashmi of every object is the death, and the spirituality in the object, the varavaya, the nitzas alaki, the godly spark that's in it, that is the life. And the person should not desire, like that Baal Shem Tov says, the physical matter. He should desire the spiritual matter that's inhabiting the object. And that's the meaning of an empty vessel that's able to contain. It doesn't mean an empty vessel, literally empty from physical things. He doesn't eat, he doesn't drink, etc. Rather, he doesn't desire the physicality of the matters, only desires their spirituality. In other words, like we said before, he desires the godly spark that's in it. He desires the godly purpose that's in it. The person has this desire and this focus on the spirituality of the physical things, then he's an empty vessel. Why is that? Because he empties himself out from the physical matters. Any questions before we go on? Okay, line 26, page base. Be understood from the explanation of the Maimer Chazal that the measure of a person of flesh and blood is that an empty vessel holds and can contain something, and a full vessel cannot contain. When we're talking about a literal physical type of giving, that's the literal sense of when we talk about the mid of a flesh and blood. So just like when we're talking about in a physical type of way, when you have a physical bowl that's filled with things, you can't put in anything more. In the kasher adam, when a person is a full vessel, when he's filled with desires, then he cannot even contain the bracha of physical good. What's the connection? So he says as follows. Since the goal of the creation of a person is for the spiritual service, therefore he doesn't really hold gashmis, because this is not who and what he is about. But when the person is an empty vessel, he emptied himself out of all physical matters. Then he contains also a physical ashpa. How come? What is the emptying itself out? So again, just like in the physical world, an empty cup you'll be able to pour something in there. So why all of a sudden, if we said that since his purpose is not the physical, why when he's empty of his physical taivas, all of a sudden now he could contain the physical? When he was filled with the physical taivas, since his purpose is spiritual, we said, there's no room to fill himself with physicality. But when he is not focused on the physical taivas, when he's focused on the spiritual, then all of a sudden he's able to contain a lot of physical brachas. Why? That's not his purpose, we said before. He says in line 5, as though the goal of his creation is for a spiritual service, and physicality, that's not his purpose, that's not what he's here for. The kol makom still and all. Since he becomes an empty vessel of his desires, he doesn't desire the physical matters. He only desires their spirituality. And only because he desires the spiritual benefit that can come from it, he desires the dvar havaya that's in the physical, he desires to elevate the godly spark that's there, etc. Harei oz hagashmi shaloi hi ruchnius. So then even his physical things now become transformed to be wholly spiritual. And the spiritual, that is what he's about. So now he's dealing with something that he's about because he's transformed the physical into something spiritual. Therefore, it can contain the physical hashpah because that's not physical anymore, because it's spiritual. And that was what he was meant to do, to connect and have to do with spirituality. To give now another reason why it's possible that when the person is divorced from his physical desires, then he can contain much physical benefit and good. Line 12, he's able to contain and hold a hashpah gashmis, physical good, without boundary, without limitation. Though the place of the person is limited, he can still have much hashpah, keeping to agashmi shalai ruchni, since his physical is spiritual. And the ruchni is einam toifeses makim, and the spiritual does not occupy any space. Okay, my word, but the Rishi Parson Nitzavim, much was like this brought down to Amarim Parson Nitzavim, and a metaphor for this, an analogy for this, an example of this. Mislapshus kama koiches, from the enclothing of many different soul powers. Rots and seichel, machshavim, and moyach echad. In one physical brain, you could have the power of will, you could have the power of intellect, you have the power of thought. Why? Because since they're spiritual, they don't occupy physical space. So therefore, when a person transforms his physical into the spiritual, so then he could contain a lot of it because it doesn't occupy space. Therefore, he can contain physical good without a boundary. According to this will be also understood the idea that an empty vessel can hold, according to the explanation. Also, the measure of a person, there's an avoid of the Eibishter, the avoid of the person by his own power. It doesn't mean an empty vessel, like we said before, that he doesn't eat and drink. Rather, that even when he eats and he drinks and he does all of his needs and all of his necessities that he needs to have to be able to survive, he still doesn't desire the physicality of his eating and drinking, etc. He does not desire the permitted things, and also the necessities. He only does it for the spiritual benefit that's in it. Therefore, he's called top of page Yudalit, an empty vessel. The Kibun Shagashmi Shaloi. Gashmi is, since his physicality is not really physical because he's made it into spiritual. So then he is empty from physical things. When he's an empty vessel, then an empty vessel can contain in it. It holds in its spiritual influence and flow, not just what we spoke about before, that the physical, he can contain a lot of physical blessings, but also when he's divorced himself from physical need, so then he can contain a lot of spirituality in him. Should be called to therefore he's able to do his avoid to transform his animal soul to kedusha. That all his animal souls of all of his powers of his animal souls become filled with the powers of the godly soul.